that's enough people to get going with. So thank you so much. I am Assemblymember Jen Lunsford. I represent the east side suburbs of Monroe County outside of Rochester. Thank you very much for joining us today to talk about this incredibly important topic. As I mentioned, for some of you who are just joining the call, if you wouldn't mind putting your name and office in the chat so we can keep track of who is here from where, and make sure we send you any updates that generate from this meeting. I apologize in advance. I'm fighting off a little cold, so I have sexy jazz voice and not quite the verve I would normally bring to you on a call like this. So please excuse the sniffles that I have. All right. So we are joined today by myself, by Assemblymember Amy Paulin and her team. She is carrying the bill that we're going to be sort of anchoring this discussion around. That bill number is A6998. My staff will put that in the chat. That is the bill for the rate increase for early intervention services. We have Brigit Hurley, who's the Chief Program Officer at the Children's Agenda, that's heading up the Kids Can't Wait campaign. We have Lynn Mordenga, who's a parent of a child who is in the system. We have Amanda Wilbert, who is an occupational therapist and the regional director of Step by Step, which is a developmental and pediatric services organization. And we're going to be talking today about the ultimate goal, which is getting early intervention rate increases in through the budget in this coming year. I'm going to talk a little bit at the end about some of the legislative issues we're going to be dealing with around that. But to begin, I think is someone from Amy's office here. Did Amy want to say hello, or let me see. If someone from Amy Paulin's office is here, can you just unmute yourself and say hi? Going. We'll get them later. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with our dear friend Brigit Hurley, who is an expert in this field. The Children's Agenda, for those of you who are not privileged enough to live in Rochester and have access to all of our wonderful resources, is an incredible organization that does a lot of really important policy work around children's issues. So Brigit is going to give us a discussion about early intervention services and the crisis that we're facing. I also want to acknowledge that Chantel Jackson is here, Assemblymember Chantel Jackson, whose son TJ, Dean of the Baby Caucus, is going to be our mascot for this, as he has entered EI as well. I'm sure I'm going to notice some of my other colleagues and friends here, but let's get started with Brigit. Brigit.
Good morning, everyone. I want to thank Assemblymember Lunsford for this opportunity today to talk with you. I'm going to use my portion of the agenda to provide three things that I hope will be helpful to you. One is just a basic description of the early intervention program for those of you who are not familiar with it. Secondly, to try and capture how infants and toddlers in New York are being impacted by the problems in New York's early intervention program right now. And then finally, what can the state do to respond to this crisis? So first, as Jen said, I'm with the Children's Agenda, which is an independent multi-issue children's advocacy organization based in Rochester, but operating statewide with a statewide focus. So in 2017, we were made aware of a growing issue in Monroe County around children with developmental delays and disabilities, young children, infants and toddlers with developmental delays and disabilities, not getting the services and the therapies that they were entitled to. So that sort of launched our journey and launched the Kids Can't Wait campaign, because what we found was that there were children all over New York State, young children all over New York State, waiting for services to address their delays and disabilities in violation of federal law. So how is EI administered? It's a national program. It's in every state, most territories. It was created by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the IDEA law. And At the federal level, it's administered by New York State Department of Health, and it's funded through state, county, Medicaid, and private insurer funds. Two things that are embedded in the core of the early intervention program are that every child who is eligible has a right to the services. And secondly, that parent choice should be followed in every step of the process. So kids have a right to these services, and parents have a right to be involved in the decision-making around the services that their children receive. And right now, New York State is violating both of those principles. So early intervention, I've been told by many of you, honestly, who have either been through the program yourselves or you have children in the program, is a real game changer for young kids. The need for EI is based on either a medical condition that exists from birth or a developmental delay that is noticed by a parent, a pediatrician, a child care provider, because a child isn't reaching the milestones that we all watch for with a baby. So any of those folks, the parent, the provider, or excuse me, the child care program, the pediatrician, or another involved adult can make a referral for a child to the early intervention program at the county level. And that referral, again, must be approved by the parent. So to make this a little bit simpler, I'm going to use my friend's brand new baby named Zoe. And let's say, so Zoe is born, and at some point, as I said, a parent or another adult recognizes that she's maybe not developing in the same way that, say, her older sibling did. So they're referred to the EI program, again, that connects them with a county program, and an evaluation is scheduled. That evaluation must occur within 45 days. So the evaluation, as you can imagine, looks at Zoe's speech, hearing, large motor skills, fine motor skills, social emotional well-being, a host of other things, and assesses how she is doing developmentally. It may be found that she's fine, and that's the end of the early intervention process for Zoe and her family. But if there is a delay found, then she is assigned a service coordinator, again at the county level. And at that point, a team of folks are assembled to determine what services and therapies Zoe needs. Zoe's parents are, again, part of that process. The nature of the services and the dosage, how often she's going to be receiving these services and how many minutes per dose she's going to be receiving are part of her individualized family service plan, or IFSP, which is basically an IEP for an infant or a toddler, IFSP. And again, parents sign off on each of those, on that plan. The services can be provided in Zoe's home, or it could be in her child care program. It could be at a Head Start program, or any other community setting where the team agrees that would work for receiving the services. So here's the key. Once that plan is established, Zoe should receive services, start receiving services within 30 days. And those services should continue until either it's determined that she no longer needs the services, or she transfers at age 3, she transfers to the preschool special education program. So that's the ideal. That's not the reality. So there's many data points to support this, but I'll just reference some of the major summaries of the situation. So in February of 2023, the New York State Office of the State Comptroller released an audit of the early intervention program, finding that 51%, half of eligible families, did not receive all of the therapeutic services that their child had a legal right to receive. Insufficient provider capacity is a key reason why services were not provided. and racial and geographic disparities in access to early intervention exist all over the state. So, as I said, this report confirmed what we all have known, which is that the reason why infants and toddlers are not receiving the services that they're entitled to is because there's simply not enough therapists and service providers in the system. In fact, we've lost over a quarter of our providers in New York State since 2018. The reason why the providers are leaving the early intervention system is because reimbursement rates are lower now than they were 20 years ago. Some of the rates are actually lower now than they were when the program started in the mid-90s. So if you do adjust for inflation, the 2022 rates for example, service coordination, screening, evaluation, would have to double to have the same spending power as they did when they began in 1994. So again, comparing 2022 rates to 1994, the 2022 rates should have doubled, and instead they've stayed the same or gone down. On top of that, so rates have not increased. On top of that, early intervention providers didn't receive any of the COVID-related bonuses or retention subsidies or EI rate increases. So they were left out of all of the healthcare providers who very justifiably received those bonuses and increases. So they have not seen any of those infusions to their compensation. So the providers that I know are really passionate about this program. They love working with infants and toddlers. And they love that because at that point in a child's life, their brain is developing. They're very adaptive and responsive to interventions. So you can work with a 2-year-old who is really struggling with speech and, you know, by the end of the service time, see tremendous improvements. Same with all of the other disciplines in EI. So the providers love working in the system. They leave reluctantly, but they leave because they can't pay their student loans, they can't pay their rent, and they can't pay their bills. And there is, at this point, there's not a lot of hope that they're going to be able to do so. So the solutions that we're recommending for the state in 2024, which are in the one pager that was, I believe, circulated ahead of time. One is, of course, to increase reimbursement rates. We have had a request that early intervention reimbursement rates increase by 11% for 3 years now. The preschool special education program has received an equivalent increase. And so we're saying simply the infants and toddlers deserve as much as the preschoolers. We are recommending this year that the rate increase be applied to services delivered in person. The reason why we are putting that qualifier on our recommendation is that many children across New York State are being offered only services delivered via teletherapy. Teletherapy is a wonderful thing. It meets the needs of some families, and we believe they should have a right to services delivered in that fashion. But for most children and most families, it doesn't work. Either it's not appropriate for the therapy that's being provided, or the family does not have terrific internet service or the right device. And so we believe that families should have the choice of how their child receives early intervention services. So in-person services must be available. At this point, they increasingly are not available because providers, again, are not able to, they're sometimes choosing telehealth because they can provide more, they can serve more children. So we need to incentivize and help cover the costs of delivering in-person services through the rate increase. 11% is not going to solve our problems. We know that, right? So at this point, we're recommending 11%. We know that there needs to be more compensation provided, more resources poured into the EI system. So our second recommendation is that New York State commission a cost study to identify how much does it really cost to deliver effective early intervention services, and then work towards covering those costs. And finally, because there's, again, so few providers who are coming out of graduate programs in occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech, language pathology, who are choosing early intervention because of the low rates, we're recommending that New York State create a loan forgiveness program for graduates out of the EI disciplines who agree to provide in-person services in medically underserved areas of New York State. So happy to answer questions later on if there's an opportunity to do that, or please feel free to look on Facebook or Google the Kids Can't Wait campaign. We'd be happy to talk more with anyone. I just want to end by saying we appreciate very, very much that the Senate and the Assembly both had an EI rate increase in their budgets in 2023. I'm asking you to please do that again, and to please serve as the real champions for these kids who need us, and make sure that the 11% increase for in-person services is in the budget again this year. And we all need to be really, we need to amplify our voices to the governor, and ask that she do the same. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Brigit. If you have questions, we are going to hold those until the end, but feel free if you want to just get it out of your head to shove it in the chat and we can keep track of those. We're now going to go to Lynn Mordanga, who is a parent of a child in the EI system, very experienced on these issues, unfortunately, due to her personal experience with some of these wait lists and delays. So Lynn?
Hi, everybody. I just want to first thank Assemblymember Jen Lunsford for holding such a crucial and much needed legislative bill briefing for early intervention. And I just want to thank everybody here who have been champions and continue to fight for this legislation, and also to continue to urge Governor Hochul to put this in our upcoming executive budget. As a parent of a child who received and was waiting for early intervention services, it has been a very long and challenging journey. I would like to share firsthand about these experiences, as you can see how crucial early intervention is and needed when given at the right time, and how agonizing it is when it is not delivered. My son Timothy, who is almost 3 now, was introduced to needing early intervention services back in February of 2022. At that time, he was 15 months and not really walking and knew very little words. I brought this concern up with my pediatrician, who referred me to the number for early intervention. She said it was a wonderful program funded by the state where you get a full assessment done to see where he may need special support and services to help him meet his developmental needs. I thought to myself, this is great. I can have peace of mind as a parent to know he's okay by going through with the assessment. And I assumed it would be a very straightforward process. At that time, I was able to get an assessment right away. And so I was really happy. And at that time, he qualified for physical therapy with speech services and occupational therapy being added later on. I was told after he was assessed that I should receive services within 30 days, since it was a federal right that a child should not be left that long waiting for services. I was very hopeful that he could start receiving these services, but as the time wore on, I asked my service coordinator, which is a county worker, we're in Monroe County, Rochester, New York, who works with early intervention, to help with the individualized services. She then told me that Timothy was put on an overcapacity or a waiting list until therapists could see him. That waiting turned to 7 months for a physical therapist. To be honest, those months were hard, since, as you know, if you're a parent, kids grow so rapidly and their brains are developing so quickly. I was so concerned Timothy was missing out on developmental gains without having the one-on-one support he so desperately needed. As a parent, I felt helpless since I knew there were so many things I couldn't meet his needs, especially with speech and motor coordination, since I wasn't a trained professional in that field. When I finally did receive the call that there was going to be a physical therapist to work one-on-one with him, I was so overjoyed. I saw Timothy meet leaps and gains with being able to get that one-on-one guidance, coaching and intervention, even if it was just 30 minutes a week. He became more confident and developed that ability to walk on his own. As a parent, the therapist was also there to help me, give me guidance on things to work on throughout the week to help with his physical skills. Just being able to have that one-on-one therapy became such a support for Timothy and our family. I truly believe in the statement that it takes a village to raise a child, and being able to have the proper therapy through early intervention was that village for us. And I just want to show a picture of Timothy working with his physical therapist. You probably can't see it that well, but it just gives you a picture of how much that support meant to us. However, we are still waiting for him. However, at that time, we were still waiting for him to receive his one-on-one speech therapy, which he also desperately needed. Despite several inquiries to my service coordinator, all she could tell me was that he was still on the overcapacity or waiting list. I had asked her one time what number I was or how many families before me were waiting for a speech pathologist. She couldn't give me exact number, but she told me it was around over 600 families in Monroe County who were still waiting before me for a speech therapist. I was stunned, which means there were probably over 600 families before me that were also waiting for their own child to receive speech therapy. As soon as I heard that number, I just knew that Timothy was never going to receive that one-on-one therapy he really needed. Our physical therapist, Devin, who works both with kids in early intervention, so those under 3, and preschoolers who are over age 3, she told me in her field they have to work with both, since there's simply no money if you only see kids through early intervention services. I also know in Rochester, where I live, there are very few agencies that focus on early intervention services due to the low rate of pay, and many of them ended up just focusing on preschooler services because they simply can't keep the staff to just focus on early intervention alone. As a side note, I also myself ended up moving my son Timothy up earlier to preschooler special services as he is almost 3, so that he could finally get the proper one-on-one services he needed, which he didn't get with early intervention. In the end, my son Timothy never got the one-on-one speech therapy through early intervention that should have been his federal right. This is simply unacceptable. He was offered telehealth speech therapy, but that was after 1.5 years of waiting. By then, so much time had passed, and seeing a therapist remotely was awkward for Timothy, since his attention did not last with a therapist on screen. Everyone knows young kids learn better in person if the pandemic has taught us anything. I was grateful for being introduced to an agency called Rochester Hearing and Speech, who were able to provide a parent and child group with a speech pathologist. Though the group therapy wasn't the ideal setting, I was thankful for something to help him with his speech. In that parent-child group, I met other recent families whose children just started receiving early intervention services and who were also waiting. Some were very hopeful that they would receive their services soon because a new school year was coming. I honestly didn't have the heart to tell them that I was in their boat waiting for so long and that there would be a possibility their child would never receive the therapy they so desperately needed. It breaks my heart in looking back at my experiences with waiting. I never want any other family to struggle to advocate for the services that I had endured with my own son. Something needs to change. We can't just accept that this is what it is. Early intervention lays the foundation for success for a child. The 0 to 3 years time frame is so crucial to build the foundation for a lifetime for a child. Why not pour more resources and money to set up a child so they don't get left behind? Kids can't wait for delayed services. So I'm urging you to make the 11% increase to the state budget. And when it comes down to the wire, that the Governor Hochul will put it into her executive budget. Think of my own son, Timothy, who never got some of his services through early intervention, and so many other kids and families who are still waiting for these crucial and time-sensitive services. Thank you for giving me this opportunity and standing with us in this legislation.
Thank you so much, Lynn. We really appreciate you sharing this story. Hearing from parents who have been on these waiting lists is a really essential part of this narrative, and your voice will help other parents. And I appreciate you being vulnerable with us again today. I'm going to move now to one of our providers, Amanda Wilbert, who's an occupational therapist. Amanda, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And Brigit and Lynn, thank you so much, because a lot of what you have said is absolutely what we see as providers. So I've been an occupational therapist for 12 years in early intervention. I'm now the regional manager of a company called Step by Step in Rochester. And I wanted to paint a picture of the providers that work in early intervention. Most of the providers have master's degree, doctorates, multiple certifications, and really are experts in child development because of their years of working in this field, and often can help families with their concerns before even their pediatrician is aware of a need for a child. Providers get paid per visit. That's it. We don't get paid if we drive to a house and no one's home. We don't get paid if the session ends early because the family has an emergency. We don't get paid to write the notes that are required by Medicaid. We don't get paid to write reports that we need to write every 6 months on child, or when they transition to the preschool system. Some children need extra time and support for medical equipment, which we don't get any reimbursement for. We don't get paid if the family wants to talk to us after hours because they're having a hard day or something major happened with them and they need their support from their therapist. We don't get reimbursed gas mileage, or even the supplies that we might buy for a family, or spend on our own toys and things to bring into somebody's house that might need something. We all have state licensures and professional accreditations that require our continuing education, and they're expensive courses that we don't get reimbursed for. Our health benefits are limited. Our healthcare plans are pretty costly. And if you ask any provider, when they go home every night, they're doing hours of unpaid work. Our workload has only increased to try to fit more kids in each day for pay that hasn't changed, while inflation is making everything more expensive. Many of my providers are working multiple jobs to be able to afford to stay in this field. So those are some reasons that providers are leaving Rochester in early intervention. And what we're seeing happen is that the providers who are staying can kind of choose where they want to be. So now there's a discrepancy in Rochester and in the state of who's going to get services and how it's going to be delivered, right? Are you going to get telehealth because I can't drive 30 minutes to a rural part to see you, versus getting the one-on-one support in a nice part of Rochester? EI often attracts new graduates, and Brigit kind of touched on this. And what happens is we train them for about 2 years. They learn a lot and they leave for a better paying position. So when a provider finally gets when a family finally gets a provider, they may get a provider with no experience. They may get 3 speech therapists in the year because they're all leaving so fast. And EI really needs specialized therapists, people with experience, because some of the delays that we see are not things that, any Joe Schmo could help somebody with. In the last 4 years, Step by Step has lost 50% of its providers. And people are leaving for school districts. They're becoming stay-at-home moms. They're leaving for adult care or just moving out of state. One of my employees became a stay-at-home mom after having a baby in 2021 because the cost of daycare is so high and our pay is so low, it didn't make sense for her to keep working. She was an EI therapist for 9 years. Last year, I lost a PT that had worked with Step by Step for 20 years. She went to BOCES because the pay for a 10-month position was equivalent or better to our 12-month position. Plus, she gets better benefits, retirement, better healthcare plan, time off for holidays, snow days. She doesn't have to put as much wear and tear on her car, doesn't have to take her work home with her, and has hours that match her kids' schedules. So with all of those benefits, really, she is making more than what she would in an early intervention position. 4 months ago, I lost an OT with 3 years experience. She said that rent for an apartment is equal to a mortgage. The housing market is insane and can't get a house. She needs a new car and her student loan payments are coming back. So her answer was to buy a small camper for her and her husband to live in and then park it in different people's driveways. That to me is just mind blowing. She has a master's degree and really can't afford to live and work in pediatrics, which is an area that she loves. So she left for a skilled nursing home and she is earning $30,000 more in a skilled nursing home than she could in early intervention. So another young OT followed her because who can pass up a $30,000 raise? An 11% increase, right? As Brigit said, we know won't touch a $30,000 raise, but it's a good start. And I think that we need the consistent, not just one-time help for this system, right? If we only get one-time help for early intervention, we're going to be in the same shoes and we're not going to see any major changes. I want to share some other stories about families just to show you the impact of early intervention as well. When I started in early intervention, children with significant needs could receive an entire team of providers on a weekly basis, and their outcomes were significantly better. We all know autism is the fastest growing developmental disability in the world. In 2017, New York State actually released a best practice for children with autism. It stated that comprehensive and intensive services, which is greater or equal to 15 hours per week in EI, produces the best outcomes. I was lucky enough to be on a team with a child whose parents ran with that. The child received over 20 hours of therapy a week from when he was 2 years old to 5. At 2, he didn't talk, look at you, play, or participate with bedtime, bath time, brushing teeth. And at 5 years old, he transitioned to a general ed kindergarten with an aide as a fully verbal, playful child ready to learn. And now the therapy he gets in school is very minimal. I worked with another child who was born prematurely, spent several months in the NICU, and the doctors told her family she would never walk, talk, or feed herself because she had muscular dystrophy. After receiving EI services of OT, PT, and speech at 3 years old, she was running, singing, and using utensils to feed herself. That's a pretty common story in early intervention. We have seen and heard those over and over again of child's never going to do this, but with the right support, they really can. The right support's just not happening anymore. Kids with significant delays are waiting for months and getting a minimum amount of support, as you've heard. And I want to share a couple of those stories as well. So there's a 3-year-old boy who came to Step by Step for a self-pay summer group, which means his family had to pay their own money out of pocket. He never received his EI mandated speech or OT services before he transitioned to CPSE. And his mom thought her problems were solved because she went to CPSE, that all of a sudden all these providers would be available for her. Well, that really isn't the case because we pull from the same pool of providers. So this little boy still has not received OT services, and he lives in a rural part of Rochester. I worked with another little girl last year with a rare genetic condition. In fact, she's like one of 15 known cases in the world. She can't feed herself, doesn't play with toys, doesn't like bath time, and didn't walk until she was 2.5 years old. She received PT and special education weekly, 3 OT consults, and was able to receive speech only through telehealth before she went to a specialized daycare called Daystar. So just put yourself in her parents' shoes. What would you do when you have a child with that significant of a medical condition. Who do you turn to? Who's going to answer your questions? Right? Your pediatrician is an expert in a medical field, not how to help your child walk. What do you think would happen if she didn't get services until she was 5 and went to school? I think she would still not be walking, not be playing, not be, participating, communicating with her family. I know another little boy who was born 3 to 4 months early. He spent 2 months in the NICU and then waited for 4 months for EI services. Now he's 13 months old and he's only sitting or standing, but not crawling, walking, rolling, or moving the way we would expect a child his age. Another child with a feeding need waited for EI services for 9 months, and the family sought out private pay therapy at $90 a session until they could get their EI support. That's just not doable for families. Families aren't going to be able to pay that price. They're not going to be able to travel, and they really shouldn't have to be able to get the services that should be given to them, right, through the early intervention company or program. So I just want to say, those are like 4 stories. There are over 1,200 kids on that waiting list, right? They all have similar stories. It's not just a handful of people, and that's only Monroe County. Looking at the state, I can't imagine how many families are feeling that similar need of being helpless and not knowing how to help their child. So thank you, and I hope that everyone's continued support will help make some changes before this system doesn't exist anymore and our schools will be overwhelmed with all the children who are not getting this early support.
Thank you so much, Amanda. I would like to welcome Assemblymember Lunsford, who's just showed up in his festive shirt today. We got the polka dot memo. Something that Amanda brought up that I think is a really important aspect of this crisis is that families with means can find the services. People who can pay are left out at lower rates than people who can't. So this is very much a crisis of poverty. It is a crisis of race. It is a crisis of urban versus rural. People who have are getting better services than people who have not. And that is not how our state should treat children who need help. I'm going to very quickly summarize a little bit of what we've heard today. As Brigit and our other members who were kind enough to meet with us today mentioned, there's over 1,100 kids on the waiting list in Monroe County at any given time. That is the number that I have heard consistently since taking office in 21. It was worse during COVID, though, again, harder to assess those numbers because we just weren't getting reported kids as often. This is a crisis across the state, though Rochester has been very good about being vocal about it. My goal this summer was to make sure that we were getting statewide voices on this issue. I have met with NYSET, the school union. I have met with NYSAC, the Association of Counties. I've met with NYSACO, the Association of County Health Officials. I have other statewide organizations that I am trying to coordinate with to make this a top issue for them moving into the budget season. This is an issue that affects people downhill. When our kids don't get early intervention services, they need more services in school. That puts extra strain on our schools, extra cost. Kids end up needing services through Medicaid throughout their school careers and afterwards, putting more strain on the system. Funding early intervention services is a no-brainer. Not funding it is cutting off your nose to spite your face. And this is the argument that I keep making. As we're moving into budget season, I would like all of you to help me make this as loud of an issue for the governor as possible. Over the last 3 years, we have had this rate increase in the budget in the Senate and Assembly one houses. What has happened is that as the budget moves along, sometime in the night, close to when we finally pass the budget, it just falls out. No one tells us why. We always have to raise our hand and ask, and then no one makes eye contact with you and tells you, oh yeah, sorry, that didn't make it in this year. And it's inconceivable. We need to make this loud and embarrassing for the executive to remove in the middle of the night, because that's what's happening. We are doing our part in the legislature and it's falling apart in the executive. First under Cuomo and now under Hochul. We're going to have a tough budget season coming up, particularly as it relates to healthcare. We need to make it clear that this is a cost saver over time, that this will cost our state less, in addition to being, the legally and morally right thing to do. So I'm going to ask all of you to please sign on to Amy Pollin's bill A6998. And then we're going to follow up to the governor's office with a sign-on letter talking about what we're asking for. And then we're also going to be asking some of our partner organizations to do letters as well. If there are organizations in your community that are not already part of the Kids Can't Wait campaign that you think would be interested in this issue, please let us know. You can reach out to my office. You can reach out to Brigit. Kids Can't Wait is the umbrella under which we are organizing this entire message. So if we can get as many organizations on as possible, and they've been pretty good about providers and families, but we need to make this as broad as possible to everyone who's impacted. Outside of New York City, it's the counties that ultimately pay for this out of their Medicaid budgets, which is why we've been working so hard. Our county executive, Adam Bello, has been wonderful about this. Bugging your local county executives to also be wonderful about it would be very, very helpful. We are trying to help them pay for it. They don't want these kids on their rolls either. Let's figure out what we can do. If there's any way we can be of assistance in helping you connect with people, please reach out. I am going to quickly take a look at the chat. I know Chantel had some questions. Chantel, do you want to ask the questions, or are you still here? Do you want me to do it?
Here, I just wanted to know, because with TJ's provider, he shared with me why some people choose to not work full-time as opposed to working full-time as a provider. And so can we get any insight on would providers want to work full-time as opposed to be I think 1099 worker? Help me if I'm saying that wrong.
Do Brigit or Amanda want to take that?
I mean, in my experience, people who are not working full-time are either like staying at home with their kids, right? And only putting their kids in daycare once or twice a week instead of paying an extreme amount for full-time. Or they have other jobs and are doing this as like like I want to be there, I want to help families, but it's not enough. Really, your salary is not enough for you to be doing this full time. So that's my experience with people who work kind of part-time.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just add to that? Just the comptroller brought this up in his report that first of all, the state database of providers is wildly inaccurate, and the Department of Health is really working on that, and it's getting better. But it also, when you see the percentage of early intervention providers who are working part-time, that includes folks who are, as Amanda said, working part-time for preschool special education. So it's actually a bit of a challenge to determine how many EI providers are actually working part-time and which are working part-time for EI, but also then are providing services under another program.
Yeah, and anecdotally, I can tell you, like, my son's best friend's mom is a speech pathologist, and literally I just watched this happen. I watched her logic over the course of the last few months. She had stayed home because she had 2 kids very close in age, and then she went back to work part-time because she could be flexible. She could take cases she wanted to, but all of the driving around, all of the fee for service, all of the not being paid for the time she was working, because if you're filling out a form or if you're traveling to and fro, you are not getting paid, started to wear on her. Her youngest kid started kindergarten this year, so she took a job with a school. And now we lost someone with 15 years of experience and a master's degree out of the EI service. And I think that is very common with what we're seeing in the industry. We lose a lot of direct service providers to McDonald's and Burger King in various fields, but in EI there's such a dearth of providers that there's all of these jobs in schools, and I think that we very frequently lose them, especially when they have school-age kids, because the pay is better and the time is better, and they're not paid, they're not losing money driving all the way from the suburbs into the city here and then finding out that no one's home. Changing the fee for service model is also important. We're talking here about rate increases, but there's a few things we can do. I've been in conversations with our county executive about doing a pilot here in Monroe where we do a Medicaid rate add-on through the county through a separate fund to provide funding for those things that cannot be billed through Medicaid right now. The waiver process is happening right now. I have talked with our DOH commissioner, who is a pediatrician, who I think, understands this issue well, to see if we can talk about trying to work something into that waiver so that we can provide options to bill for those services if we have the political will to do so. And hello, TJ.
Can I just add one other thing?
Sure.
What I've also noticed is that with TJ's providers, they don't go to certain neighborhoods because of parking issues, a lot of issues. But one of the things I brought up to the governor when she was here is that they should have a parking placard and be able to park just like when when probation officers go to visit their clients, they have an ability to park, and I feel like the providers should have that same ability, which is a separate issue from this, but it's one of the reasons why they do not come to certain neighborhoods. Like my son is still waiting for a special instruction right now. I can't say it's because of parking, but it's definitely certain neighborhoods people just don't want to go to.
And I know we see that here in Rochester, where there are neighborhoods people would rather not go to for a variety of reasons, which only exacerbates the class and racial issues we have with the disparities in EI. There were a few other questions here in the chat. I'm going to try to get to those. Let's see. The comptroller's audit that Brigit mentioned, there's a link, thank you, Shelby, in the chat there. Going up to the top. There will be a copy of this briefing as well as the one pager and any other additional facts we can put together for you in writing that will be sent out tomorrow. So don't worry about that. Debbie Napolitano is asking if we can have behavior analysts in the loan forgiveness list of providers. In a world where we find loan forgiveness, of course, Debbie, I will always consider our behavioral analysts. This is
thank you.
Debbie, for those of you who, again, don't have the pleasure of living here, is a fabulous advocate for the role behavioral analysts play in these services. All right, are there any other questions that I did not get to? If you want to do hands, we can do that. All right, if there are no more questions, thank you all so much for your time today. Please sign on to the bill or have your principal sign on to the bill. And we'll be following up with opportunities to sign on to things and to add your voice to this very, very important issue. Our goal, of course, is to get it in the executive budget. We'll see if that's the thing, but that's why we're starting now. I know the governor's aware of this. We've had conversations. I know the Children's Agenda just met with some people from the governor's office last week. And I know that we are doing everything we can to push from that. Hearing from this statewide would be very, very helpful. So any opportunities you have to talk to your regional reps or anybody else, please do so. All right. Thank you guys so much.